among 9 companies registered in Ireland, 4 trusts on 3 islands, a handful of galleries and real estate companies and bank accounts in at least 4 countries, possibly depriving the French public of hundreds of millions of euros. In addition to the Swiss Freeport and the Paris Vault, they had art in a nuclear bunker in the Catskills, a former fire station in New York, and many other far-flung places. I mean, there are pictures I have never seen that my great-grandfather bought. Alec told Vanity Fair in 1998. They were, he said, in vaults and crazy places, in back of other things. Over the next decade, the Wildenstein tax case wound its way through the French courts. At the same time, public outrage over tax loopholes for the wealthy was growing, and the government passed what is popularly known as the Wildenstein Law to crack down on tax evasion via foreign trusts. Still, the family won 2 controversial acquittals, first in 2017 and then again in 2018. But then, 2 years ago, France's Attorney General and tax authorities brought concerns about the decision to acquit the Wildensteins of tax fraud and money laundering to the Court of Cassation, France's highest civil and criminal court. The lead judge in the 2017 case had said that the family displayed a clear intention to hide their wealth, but the tribunal let them off because, at the time, foreign trusts fell into a legal gray area. In reopening the case, the Court of Cassation disagreed, saying the lower court disregarded the facts. It's really uncommon, Dumont-Begui says of the upcoming retrial. She believes the path to victory will be much tougher for Guy and his co-defendants this time. Prosecutors will argue that the Wildensteins were, in fact, required to report their foreign trusts at the time of Danielle's death, and later Alec's. They also contend that the trustees improperly took orders from the family in violation of the rules of irrevocable trusts, which must be independently managed. The extreme lengths to which the family went to obscure their wealth led French media.
Right now I'm going to kind of what I call the fancy Kroger in Fairfield Township. It's got more selection, it's a bigger, newer store.
The Impressionists of finance. But in reality, many of their practices are commonplace in high levels of the art trade, which a 2020 U.S. Senate subcommittee called the largest legal unregulated market. Unlike financial institutions, art businesses are not expressly subject to the Bank Secrecy Act, which requires firms to verify customers' identities, report large cash transactions, and flag suspicious activity. A study from the U.S. Department of the Treasury last year cited a figure estimating that money laundering and other financial crimes in the art market may amount to about $3 billion a year. Britain and the European Union, however, have implemented anti-money laundering regulations that require stricter due diligence in art transactions there. According to a report by Art Basel and UBS, auction houses did about $31 billion in sales last year. They say that they know who their clients are, but those may just be the names of art advisors or other intermediaries, and collectors' insistence on anonymity, long framed as genteel discretion, hasn't budged. The buyer of the most expensive artwork ever sold at auction, Leonardo da Vinci's $450.3 million Salvator Mundi, registered at Christie's a day before bidding with a $100 million down payment, identifying himself as one of 5...
It's Sunday, 68 degrees outside. Pretty nice fall day. I'm actually not going to go to Kroger. I'm going to Great Clips, which is next to the Kroger. Yeah, it's nice out. home for a little bit. And I gotta go to work. We're gonna take a carpool to Columbus for a conference. So hopefully I post some videos of the conference and downtown Columbus, wherever we go.
Putin's armored train in the far eastern region of Russia to head home after a 6-day visit with Russian officials, including Vladimir Putin. It was Kim's first overseas trip in 4 years. The visit is raising global concerns about weapons transfer deals between the two countries. A British cabinet minister has said the entertainment industry has questions to answer in light of the sexual assault allegations against performer Russell Brand. As reported in the British media, Vicky Barker reports. Russell Brand insists that all of his encounters and relationships have been consensual, but at least one of his accusers and some former colleagues at the BBC and Channel 4 say they tried to report what they considered troubling conduct by Brand without success. Rosamund Irwin worked on the Times of London investigation. She told the BBC,
there are a lot of questions to be answered, and I think the coming days we will see a lot more scrutiny, and including in our paper, of who knew what when.
If the allegations have put off any of Brand's fans, it wasn't apparent Saturday night. He got a standing ovation at a sellout performance in London. For NPR News, I'm Vicky Barker in London. The presidential campaign of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. this weekend confirmed an armed man posing as a federal law enforcement officer attempted to see the candidate at an event in Los Angeles Friday. The security team removed the man, and Los Angeles police apprehended the suspect. I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News, Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Seed. Seed's DS-01 Daily Symbiotic is a probiotic and prebiotic formulated with strains to support gut, skin, and heart health at seed.com/public.
Good morning, this is 91.7 WVXU. It's 11:06. I'm Pam Temple. Some sunshine peeking through the clouds this morning, but it will be cloudy this afternoon, and a few isolated showers and downpours are possible. The timing of the rain could disrupt your Oktoberfest or Bengals game plans, unfortunately. A high of 75 expected. Clearing tonight and a low of 54. We'll start the work week tomorrow with some sunshine and comfy temperatures of 74. 65 now.
From PRX in the Jennifer and Ted Stanley Studios at the University of Massachusetts Boston, this is Living on Earth. I'm Jenny Doring.
And I'm Steve Kerwood. With the black people of Louisiana effectively blocked from the ballot box until the voting rights laws of the 1960s, many industrial plants along the lower Mississippi River were built in their communities without their consent. Today there are more than 150 petrochemical and other polluting plants along what's called Cancer Alley between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And while black people now can vote in Louisiana, the pattern and practice of siting plants with toxic emissions in black neighborhoods on the river continues to this day. In response to allegation of these inequities, in 2022, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency began a civil rights investigation into the state of Louisiana's permitting and monitoring of toxic industries. But as new rules were being hammered out to reform lax enforcement and lessen the toxic burden on BIPOC communities, the EPA abruptly halted its investigation. The Louisiana Attorney General filed a suit charging reverse discrimination. Joining us now with more is Monique Harden, the law director for the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice based in New Orleans. Welcome back to Living on Earth, Monique.
Hi, it's great to be back.
What kind of changes were environmental justice advocates like yourself hoping that this investigation could bring?
Well, I mean, we were, of course, cheering on the communities and bringing their civil rights complaints forward to EPA, and the EPA accepting them and opening up the investigation. This is something that we had been calling for a while, that there should be targeted civil rights investigations in Louisiana's Cancer Alley and other toxic hotspots where black and other people of color suffer the consequences of that pollution. So this was a good start and progress that was, long overdue in Louisiana and from our Environmental Protection Agency. I'm sure as your listeners know, as a federal agency, the Environmental Protection Agency has a legal obligation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to ensure that the dollars that it allocates to the states, like to a Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, do not wind up in discriminating against people on the basis of race, color, and national origin. So the EPA gives a lot of money to our state agencies across the country to operate permitting programs and to conduct monitoring of the environment and to ensure compliance or take enforcement action. And what you see, how those dollars are spent, is in a way that it really harms black communities here in Louisiana.
Now, when President Biden came into office, he made a lot of noise about dealing with environmental justice issues. He sent EPA Administrator Michael Regan to Cancer Alley early in 2021 on the, quote, Journey to Justice tour. And yet the EPA seems to be ducking out on this one. What's going on now?
Well, it's a little complicated because what President Biden did and the administration was set new policies to strengthen the federal government departments and agencies and offices to incorporate the work of ensuring environmental justice, to delivering environmental justice and tackling climate change as per the executive order President Biden signed after inauguration. Michael Regan, who President Biden appointed to be the administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, went on visits into Louisiana in particular, but also other communities in the South, to meet with folks who are battling for environmental justice. And he made a number of commitments, quite strong ones, that led to the civil rights investigation. And to the credit of EPA, they were able to nail down specific terms that really have been set a new trajectory around environmental justice when it comes to the actions and the decisions at the Department of Environmental Quality, as well as our State Department of Health and Hospitals, that would ensure health in a real practical way, which is by reducing and avoiding pollution. That all stopped when our Louisiana State Attorney General, Jeff Landry, filed a lawsuit in a federal court that's far and away on the other side of the state from where St. John Parish and St. James Parish and Louisiana's Cancer Alley are located. But he chose that particular court because I think he thought that this is where he would find some success in attacking civil rights protections and calling on the judge of the federal court to shut down the EPA's civil rights investigation and the work that was being done to develop terms for course correction at the two state departments of environmental quality and the other one on health and hospitals.
Monique Harden, we looked at the lawsuit that Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry filed, and in that complaint he writes, officials have lost sight of the agency's actual environmental mission and instead decided to moonlight as social justice warriors fixated on race. And the quote continues, EPA frequently does not care about the content of air and water emissions, but only the color of the skin of those proximate to them. What's your reaction to that complaint?
It's an obnoxious attack on civil rights and environmental justice. And it makes me think, like, you know, we step back into the 1940s or the 1950s when there was so much resistance to freedom and equality and civil rights in this country. And the promise of the civil rights movement is to ensure that no one is discriminated against on the basis of race, color, or national origin. And what the state attorney general has a problem with is that stopping discrimination for him is the problem.
The Attorney General's complaint makes it sound like this is racism against white people to regulate this way.
It's strange to make that kind of argument, but anyone looking at Louisiana and Cancer Alley can see the race of the people who have the most to put up with when it comes to industrial pollution and hazards. It's predominantly black residents for generations now. And instead of dealing with that and figuring out a just remedy for that, this is what the state attorney general has chosen to do with the help of attorneys who represent one of the companies that is the subject of the civil rights complaint, a company called Formosa. So there's a real ethical problem in terms of the serious conflict of interest that exists in this lawsuit brought by the Louisiana State Attorney General because of the contract and agreement and monies paid to attorneys representing one of the companies that is the subject of the civil rights complaint.
By the way, Monique, what was in the deal that got spiked? I mean, what was the kind of progress that had been made by the EPA in getting the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality to negotiate on these issues of dealing with extra burden on communities of color?
Milestones that would have been reached with this agreement is one, obligating the Department of Environmental Quality to deny a permit for a new facility or an expansion of an existing facility on the grounds that it would result in racial discrimination. It would cause disproportionate pollution burdens based on race. It would require a transformation in how the agency goes about making a permit decision that would require a look at all of the various factors taking place in a community that contribute to poor environmental and public health conditions for residents. That's also known as cumulative impact analysis. So that was another key agreement that was reached before Attorney General Landry and the Formosa attorney stepped in to put the kibosh on EPA civil rights investigation and the work towards these new settlement terms.
What kind of money might be at stake in this in terms of industry? I mean, what's the pipeline in Cancer Alley in terms of things like plastic production plants and natural gas pipelines, storage facilities, and so on?
Wow, well, Steve, that's a very important question because you're talking billions and billions of dollars of projects that each one has its own serious level of hazards and risks for both communities, health and safety, our environment, and certainly our climate. We're talking about dozens of industrial facilities that are targeting Louisiana for a whole new wave of gas production facilities, hydrogen, ammonia gas, liquefied natural gas plants, and a number of plastic production, which are also use a gas feedstock in the production. So when you consider the fact that each of those facilities would need to apply for a permit in order to construct or build the facility, and that those permits set forth various, environmental requirements. What this civil rights settlement agreement was contemplating was another level of considerations on any proposed industrial facility that would have to countenance racial discrimination and avoid it. And when you're thinking about those projects and they're targeting mostly black communities here in Louisiana, this kind of a settlement agreement would probably give them more than pause around their plans and their investment dreams and opportunities that they see for themselves and shareholders. And so there's a lot of industrial interest in seeing that civil rights protections don't get rooted in Louisiana when it comes to environmental protection.
I'm confused. President Biden made so much noise about environmental justice, and yet his Environmental Protection Agency really kind of folded its tent in the face of opposition from the state of Louisiana. Why are they abandoning this investigation?
Well, I think it's important to know that while EPA began and had undertaken this
of yours?
Maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome.
Sam Schechner is our Europe-based technology reporter.
Regulation often can be pretty boring. Just the word, makes people kind of glaze over.
It's not boring to Sam, though. That's because when it comes to tech rules, whatever happens in Brussels doesn't just stay in Brussels, or Europe for that matter. The new iPhone is just one example.
That cable is actually just a sign of what's to come in a whole slew of other EU rules and regulations that big companies that go far beyond just Apple are going to have to bend to in the coming years.
Often, the EU's laws go global.
It's called the Brussels effect. It was a term coined by Anna Bradford, a scholar at Columbia Law School.
And by the Brussels effect, I refer to the European Union's unilateral ability to regulate the global marketplace.
It describes the way in which rules made in Brussels tend to have a ripple effect for a variety of reasons outside of Europe. Other parts of the world have, sort of taken their cues from the EU, and we're starting to see parts of that coming into the US.
Europe has been bringing the hammer down on big tech since the 90s, and more recently, their enforcement is intensifying.
In the last 5 years, we've seen the EU actually ramp up its efforts to pass a whole new slate of laws, and now it's kind of like gremlins. I mean, you put one in the water, and now there's like 5 things.
They're everywhere suddenly.
Keep them away from water. Don't get them wet.
Name your issue, and there's an EU tech law either passed or on the tracks for getting passed sometime soon.
One of the first of these to hatch was the GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation. And it's the reason you often see so many privacy rules when you visit a website. At a very basic level, it was meant to protect the privacy of users by limiting when and how companies can collect info about you. At first, the law was only intended to protect residents of the EU. But eventually, companies around the world implemented parts of the GDPR.
It's led companies to really update their privacy policies, which used to sort of be a kind of mishmash of stuff that didn't always really reflect the reality of where the data was going. And it's made privacy protection across the internet a little bit more standardized.
The Brussels effect in action. And potentially bigger changes are yet to come because of more regulation that went into effect last month. So, what new regulations from Brussels have had big tech scrambling?
Well, the first 2 laws in this new salvo of EU regulation are the Digital Markets Act and also the Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act forces big online platforms to beef up their policing of digital content. For example, users will see more detail about why they're seeing ads. They can turn off certain types of algorithmic recommendations, and they'll get new opportunities to appeal content moderation decisions. The Digital Markets Act is trying to pry open a handful of super big tech companies and make them subject to more competition.
So, I kind of want to know what some of these changes mean in practice on a consumer level. So, I was going to do a speed round of how this is going to affect some of these big tech firms.
Okay, speed round.
Great. Whew. What kind of changes is Google or Alphabet making?
Well, a lot, but let's go with choice screens. Google will have to offer choice screens on Android phones for people to choose a web browser other than Chrome.
And what about Apple? What changes is it making?
Well, they're working on a way for you to download apps without going through the App Store, something that, the company had said would basically compromise its security.
So that's Apple and Alphabet. What's Meta doing about the new rules?
With Meta, Facebook and Instagram are starting to notify people and let them appeal, not just when their content is removed, but sometimes when it's just restricted or their accounts are limited in ways that maybe the users suspected, but they've never been able to prove before.
And one of the few non-American companies targeted by these rules is TikTok. What's TikTok doing?
Well, TikTok is a way to get out of its famously addictive feed, where if you pause a video for half a second, suddenly your feed fills up with those kinds of videos. They're now offering to users in Europe a purely chronological feed, if you want.
These rules are incredibly sweeping. How does the EU plan to enforce them?
Both of these laws empower EU regulators to dig deep inside of the companies to make sure they're complying and to issue huge fines if they aren't.
For example, a fine for violating the Digital Markets Act could be as high as 20% of a company's global revenue. That could amount to tens of billions of dollars. U.S. lawmakers have been trying to regulate big tech for some time now. Why does it seem like the Europeans have been much more effective than the U.S. at making big tech bend?
First, Europe is big enough to matter to these companies. And second, because the politics here in Europe are aligned for these types of policies. I mean, there's 450 million consumers. It's just too much revenue to ignore. And when it comes to the politics, I mean, there's more of a consensus in Europe on a few things that makes it easier to pass tech regulations here than in the US. First of all, in Europe, it's a much more widely held view that big companies and capitalism should be regulated in the first place. Secondly, there's a difference in the way people balance some key values like free speech, privacy, and security. That balance is less tilted toward free speech in Europe than it is in the US.
But that's not to say that the EU won't have any trouble implementing these laws.
There will be this question of can, thousands of tech workers versus maybe 100, a couple hundred enforcement personnel really, is that a fair fight? Will these laws really be effectively enforced? The EU is definitely going to have to pick its balance.
So, how would you describe this moment for big tech?
I think it's a real turning point for companies that were born in the libertarian homelands of Silicon Valley, where really the dawn of the internet was like the Wild West, in good and bad ways, but we're seeing a shift towards the idea that tech should in some way be regulated.
And almost more concretely, we're seeing it now with the USB-C?
This is a case where, the EU is sort of saving everybody the hassle of, finding out, as I did on my recent vacation, that I didn't bring enough lightning cables. I only had USB-C cables. And, we were left one iPhone out each night, had to not charge, and it was really frustrating.
Yeah, it's that or buy another lightning charger, which you then take home with you, and then you have an extra cable. The whole situation.
It's obviously a frustration that everybody has had. So, for once we can say, thanks, bureaucrats.
When you finally switch over to your new USB-C iPhone, what are you going to do with all of your lightning cables? Because our colleague Kim McCrail has a whole suitcase full of discarded cables from years past.
I braid them together into a bracelet, I actually think my kids who managed to find arts and crafts materials will surely be happy to have things to, make into robots and houses and,
That's all for today, Wednesday, September 13th. The Journal is a co-production of Spotify and the Wall Street Journal. If you like our show, follow us wherever you get your podcasts. We're out every weekday afternoon. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.
This episode is brought to you by Viator. Experiences are what people love the most about travel. With thousands of bookable experiences, Viator has something for everyone, from simple tours to extreme adventures. And with millions of traveler reviews, you'll have all the information to book the best activities. Download the Viator app now and use code Viator10 for 10% off your first booking in the app. One app, over 300,000 travelers
A friend got it.
I think I got it at the Giants game.
Then a neighbor. For the fourth time. Then a colleague.
Good luck with that daily news podcast, y'all, but I'm out.
And another colleague.
I've got the bug formerly known as the double.
And another colleague.
Support for this episode comes from Zelle. You'd never fall for an online scam, right? You use two-factor authentication, ignore calls from everyone named Spam Risk, and never use the password. But scammers are getting more sophisticated and more active, which means they're finding millions of new victims every single day. The good news is that there's a lot we can do to protect us.
Support for the show comes from Gold Peak Real Brew Tea. There's a time of day, about an hour before sunset, where the rays feel warm and the breeze feels cool. But that hour of golden bliss is always gone too soon. You might rekindle that feeling with a bottle of Gold Peak. Made with high-quality tea leaves, its smooth taste transports you to golden hour at any hour. Gold Peak Tea. It's got to be gold.
I don't know who needs to hear this, but COVID is back.
I have COVID. I got caught in summer surge.
And I got COVID again for the fourth time. It really sucks. I'm 30 for weeks, and I've been having bad body aches.
I am a nurse, y'all. A pediatric nurse, and we have been getting some COVID. And school hasn't really even started yet.
And anyone else notice that, like, all the kids at school have COVID? I caught COVID on the way back from entertainment. First week it was pretty bad. I had really bad mouth sores. I was super tired. I had fever.
Today Explained is the show. My name's Sean Ramaswamy. I'm here with Karen Landon, who writes about science and health for Vox, and happens to be a trained epidemiologist. Karen, am I crazy, or do a lot of people have COVID again?
Okay, both can be true, first of all. But no, a lot of people do have COVID again. It does seem that almost everybody I know either has COVID or recently has COVID. My parents had COVID. I had COVID in August. Lots of people on our work Slack are out with COVID. A lot of people have COVID right now. It's everywhere.
What is going on?
Well, we had a wave earlier this year.
Phase 3 of America's so-called triple-demic tonight sweeping the nation with a vengeance and pushing hospitals to a brutal new breaking point.
Immunity waned and variants continue to evolve, and I think there's just now enough variants that can capitalize on the waning immunity and not enough immunity to really fight them all. And so we're seeing a lot of people now susceptible to COVID reinfection, and that's what's happening.
And anyone who pays casual attention to COVID knows that there's a new variant, but it sounds like you're saying this isn't all just the new variant. There's a bunch of variants out there.
Almost none of this is the new variant that has got the most attention lately. It's kind of a mix of variants that have been emerging over the
that, Commissioner?
I guess the point is, there's not like one variant dominating the scene right now, and the ones that are causing a lot of infections are not the one that has gotten the most media attention of late.
With all these variants afoot, did people change their behaviors this summer?
Not so far as I can tell. No one's testing that I know until they get sick, and even then, like, people have run out of those free home tests. A lot of people either cannot afford or cannot find other tests in grocery stores and pharmacies. So nobody's testing unless they absolutely have to, and if they're lucky enough to still have tests hanging around. Very few people that I know are masking. I've done a bunch of traveling recently, and I saw scant people either in the airport or on the airplane masking in crowded public spaces. I will occasionally see somebody masking, and occasionally mask myself, but that's the exception rather than the rule. There have been a couple of polls recently about how concerned people are about coronavirus, and I think the last I saw there was a Gallup poll from sometime in the middle of summer, maybe June or July, that said that maybe 18% of Americans are currently either somewhat or very concerned about coronavirus, which is almost at their all-time low. So yeah, it's just, I think, much less on the mind as a cause of concern for most Americans, and I think for a lot of people around the world.
So it sounds like people have sort of given up here. How about our governments, be it city, state, federal?
I mean, we've talked about this before, but as promised in May, our government is no longer funding testing, treatment, and most of the other things that enabled a lot of COVID protections to happen on an individual level.
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. It's